Добрый день.
Good afternoon. We will have a presentation about the setting of Postgres and 1S. Let us welcome Anton. Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Anton Doroshkevich. I'm from Novosibirsk. Represent Infosoft company. I'm head of IT in Infosoft and head of many projects in operating multi-cluster 1C systems based on Postgres and the database that should not be named. Who are in charge of 1C? Please raise your hands. Even those who have seen 1C cluster, I'm not talking about the coders. Very well. Who worked on the database which should not be named? Starting from M or with O? With M. With the letter M. So for convenience, sometimes I will draw analogies and say in Postgres it is such and such, and it looks very much like an operation in that other database. I cannot guarantee that I will not be able to say the database that should not be named and may name it, but please forgive me for that. So our tutorial will last 3 hours. And not to strain you too much with my monologue, we will pause after each section. So what do we do thereafter? We'll have Q&A sessions of 15 minutes. Because we have a lot of people, please send your questions to WhatsApp, Telegram, or text me if you wish, and also leave your name. I would not like to have anonymous questions. I will try to take all your questions, but we will observe the agenda and time schedule. If I don't answer all the questions, I will do that after the tutorial. And also, anyone who asks a question, I will respond guidelines on how to set Postgres for 1C. These are my guidelines which I developed. So it contains 22 pages with all the settings and explanations, things to do, things not to do. So each of you, if you leave your email or WhatsApp number, I will send it to you. So we will speak not solely about 1C. We will have other things. So we will start about setting Postgres in 1C. Ivan just told us that Postgres was a versatile database, and because it is so versatile, it needs set adjustment and settings to be set. And also, it is an unusual database. We will then have the WhatsApp pause, followed by Postgres Enterprise, who has touched on it. Perfect. Postgres Pro Enterprise will have a lot of information. I will show how to do it. So maybe any one of you will be lucky to work with this system again. We will launch 1C on Postgres Pro Enterprise. This will be a tutorial, not a presentation, so we'll be doing things. Then, again, the WhatsApp pause. We will then talk about backup and replica. I don't know if we will have enough time to run it, to turn it on and off and see how 1C will react to it as far as the client part is concerned. If we have enough time, we will do that. Also, I will speak about my approaches to backup copying, not solely backup copying, which is certainly required. I will speak about the copying with recovery at any point in 1C. So it will all be related to 1C. So we will run it on virtual machines. So if internet freezes, there might be interruptions. We will use the Megaphone Business Cloud. If it slows down, all the questions should be directed to Megaphone Business Cloud. It's not Postgres, which is at fault, but Megaphone. If you have a question right in the middle, raise your hand. If I see you, I will try to answer your question. Also, I may say arguable things from your point of view. Your experience may be different, which is normal. We will discuss it on the sidelines of the conference. We will discuss it offline. What I'm saying is not truth, but just my experience. You may have different experiences. Because we are swirling in the 1C world, although I talk about Postgres, I receive a lot of questions about 1C clusters and servers. This is possible, but I will answer those questions only when the Postgres tutorial is over. And only then, offline, I will be able to address those questions about 1C clusters and 1C servers. So feel free to ask your questions. I will take them after the tutorial. So let's get going. Postgres 1C settings for settings for 1C. I will show it to you live. What scares us right away? Those who transition here. So settings are in a text file compared to SMS SQL. The setting is kind of more difficult. 1S is the Windows world, 99.9%. We will not use Linux. We will use the editor to be able to survive. So things will be easier that way. So another 5 seconds, you will see it. Can you see it? Can you see it? Can you see the letters? Or shall I zoom it out? Definition, well, it's not my issue. Is it better? Good. By the way, I will not speak about how to install Postgres. Just install it. I should only say that some people missed the news from Postgres Pro of September the 20th last year. Oleg Mortonov at Infostart said that assembly of Postgres Pro was resumed. Postgres.ru website. Go there and download it. So nobody owes you anything as far as this assembly is concerned. There is a separate assembly of 1C you can find at the partners' releases. This is another story. What is the difference? The difference is who assembles it. If here it is the robot who does it, the robot of Postgres Pro, and in 1C, a 1C robot does it. Number two, so the input data is the same, but patches may be different. Which patch to use is entirely up to you. There is also Postgres Pro standard. Everybody knows it, and we use it only as a test platform for developers. And there is also Postgres Enterprise. It is fee-paying. You can get access only if you buy it. So you enter the website, enter your name and email, and install Postgres. Very easy. One thing to know and pay attention to is this. Can you see it? Let me zoom it a little bit. So what is the issue here? Oh, before I forget, we consider Postgres for Linux, not for Windows. Yes, you can install it on Windows as well. It will work, but not long and not fast. Up to 20 users with 1C. It is due to Windows, not to Postgres. The file system of Windows cannot handle some more users than 20 users. Linux, automatically, you will create a cluster with this. This is what the operation system works on. As you install Linux and do not select the Russian language, if you do not add it, you will have a different location and 1C will not launch. 1C server will not tell you that the location is wrong. It will only say a very weird phrase, database server is incompatible with 1C, is not usable for 1C.
And it's not possible to decipher it at all. Why cannot it be used? But it's quite typical. If half of you are 1C experts, I think it's very typical for you to write arrows in this way. It's not really possible for a normal person to understand what you wrote there. Even you cannot understand what it means. You have to check the code to understand what this arrow is about. And actually, in the world of 1C, almost everyone is similar, and the developers of the platform did not specify it as well, although they understand why it is not compatible. So what can you do here? You should clear data folder and enable this command with the appropriate local. If you use English system, the local will be EMEN or EMUS, and on this local you won't be able to enable anything at all. So you installed it, you launched it, and it should work. Now let's speak about settings. Well, I will have to say some boring things now. What does a setup file of Postgres look like? It looks like this. A lot of commented parameters. A lot of committed parameters. And what do you normally do? Could you please switch off these slides? So, when a person needs to amend something in the settings, what do they usually do? They just amend the things they want to amend right here. And why is it bad? Well, first of all, it's not in line with the documents, because the documents state that all the amendments into the files should be done in the very end. It's okay for me, yes. First of all, it's not in line with the documents. The document states that all the customized parameters of the setting should be in the end of the file. Postgres reads the file from top to bottom, and it applies the things that are the last ones. This is one point. So, documentation was developed in this way, and it is quite appropriate, because otherwise it will be very difficult for you to understand what you had changed before. So it's not really convenient for me to see my keyboard now. All the settings should be in the very bottom. There is a special section here, customized options. The first typical mistake that we can find on many forums is that I installed everything but it doesn't work. By default, Postgres setting is as follows. It answers the address 127.0.0.1 only. This is done for safety reasons. And local host is included here. Somehow no one notices it. Well, you can check it by asterisk at least, and if you have several adapters and you know which one you should answer and which one you don't need to answer. You should understand for which one you specify your address now. I will be quite fast in terms of settings because I don't really want to repeat the documents. But speaking about the specificity of 1C, we have to dwell upon some settings. Another setting, shared buffer. In this specific machine, it is 4 gigabytes. Why? The machine is 16 gigabytes of short-term memory. So we think that it is 16 gigabytes. Actually, it is 32, but we assumed that it is 16 gigabytes. I will answer your question at once. It doesn't mean, so this setting of 4 gigabytes doesn't mean that Postgres will never ever eat more than 4 gigabytes. Actually, almost all the settings related to the size of something, any figures or anything, not only gigabytes actually. In Postgres, this is the things that are evaluated for the planner. So you give the planner the information as follows. Please take into account that you have 4 gigabytes here. Actually, DBMS doesn't know what kind of hardware it was placed on. It doesn't know the volume of short-term memory. Well, it's possible to make a query in terms of setting, yes, but in that case, you would like to place one C server there. And how can it learn how much you will give to one C server and how much you will give to it? So, the setup of Postgres is about 2 blocks. Number 1, tell DBMS about the hardware it is installed. Block number 2, in accordance with the specificity of the database, try to remove the impact of background processes of DBMS on productivity, on performance, preserving order in the database. I'm speaking about auto vacuum and the way you can work with wall and control points. So we'll speak about it now. So shared buffer. The general recommendation is 25%. That is about cache. So this is the cache in the system that the system should use. And it is, if you do not actually allocate sufficient cache, it will address the disk subsystem continuously. If you allocate too much, it is bad as well. When the system has checkpoint, it should actually drop all the shared buffers, and it is difficult. Well, yes, buying a server with 2 terabytes of short-term memory is quite realistic, but it doesn't mean that it needs to have 520 gigabytes allocated. So you can test it. It's really difficult to drop 512 gigabytes on a disk at once. Let's speak about the buffer now. On the right, you can see all default settings that you can see after Postgres was installed. So the blue one are default ones. And on the left, you can see how we changed them. By default, the buffer is 8 megabytes. Why? Because the developers of DBMS actually were quite right to think that temporary table cannot be large. So, if in the temporary table you suddenly inserted 1 million of records, actually it means that you are a bad programmer and you are a bad architect. I mean, the person that has done it. It means that this person hasn't worked out the architecture of the database quite well. That's why now the DBMS has to do some ridiculous things instead of proper operation. But in the world of 1C, everything is built on the use of temporary tables. Everything is built on that. So, for example, when we speak about remnants and turnovers, this is a very fast function. You have to write 2 words only, and actually it can make a temporary table consistent of 1 billion entries. And if you take a section of the latest ones, you will have 1 more temporary table, and the section of the latest ones in terms of turnovers and residues, you will have 2 temporary tables. So the buffer should be enlarged, and in this case, the larger it is, the better. But you should understand once again what it is. This is a guideline for the planner. When it understands that now it will have create temp table, it is written in the code, so it evaluates the number of strings, their composition, their volume, so the volume that it will have. It reads your settings and says, well, it seems to me that the volume is 80 megabytes and it is transferred to short-term memory. If it made a mistake, if it is less, what does it mean? It doesn't mean that the query is not fulfilled. And you know, the planner frequently makes mistakes when forming temporary table, when it fills the table, and when it exceeds 128 megabytes, it will be dropped to the disk. And in this sense, that is quite similar to MS SQL, because not everything is dropped in tempdb at once. At first it goes to memory. So what do we need to understand here? So let's put 2 gigabytes and just forget about this issue of temporary table that will load the disk. Okay, we can do that, but now you should multiply these 2 gigabytes on the peak load, and our admins frequently count hardware from average load. But the question is, what will you do in case of peak load? It means that we need to multiply it by the peak load. If you have this amount of memory, you can do it. It will be fine. The next issue, work mem. How much memory will be allocated for one process during its operation? Various kinds of sortings are better to be done in the memory. It is faster. Order by is faster there. So that is quite similar to not tempdb, sorry, temp buffer actually. By default, once again, by default, the database 4 megabytes is quite sufficient for normal developer, and in 1C world that is quite different. You have to enlarge it by 128 times for it to work. There are a lot of sortings. We do many things that is not really appropriate and optimal in terms of DBMS, dropping all of it to the short-term memory, so the calculation is quite similar. You should multiply it by the number of sessions in peak load. It should be sufficient for you, and I would like to emphasize it because it turned out that not actually everyone understands it. If you specify the maximum amount of short-term memory in the parameters of MS SQL, it will never ever go beyond this parameter. But in this case, this is an evaluate value. It will take as much as it needs, and it will take whole swap file. And if worm killer is switched off, it will actually eat the whole server until complete rest of the server. If the killer is on, actually it's not much easier for you. It means that Postgres service will be stopped. So why am I speaking about that? None of these parameters will save you from bad queries. Still, in case of a bad query, your server will be crashed. No hope here. In this sense, Postgres actually never excuses programming mistakes. MS can excuse that, but Postgres will not do that. And it is very good. Finally, 1C code will be not only functional, but also fast and correct. Maintenance work mem. It is quite similar, but this is for background processes, for auto vacuum, roughly speaking. And for the vacuum and reindex for all background processes that can be enabled in the base. 64 megabytes, it was quite good, but still we need more. Why? In the world of 1C, very frequently, the index can be almost equal to the table in terms of volume. Moreover, for every table, we frequently use 10 indices without actually thinking about anything. We just think, oh, this query works fast now. But the record of all the documents is down now, the volume is finished, and no one actually cares. And now for the background processes to rebuild this system, they have to really meddle in the disk system. No one cares about that, but one query in one report worked out fast. But most likely this report will show 1 million screens to the user, and it's not really possible to be processed by a human. So the user just closes the report and checks the total figure, because it shouldn't be like that. Why am I speaking about that? It means that we really need to think about the work we do. The query should be very careful. Max file process. Yeah, here it is. I hope that you managed to read it. Actually pressed a wrong button here. But so do you manage to follow me? To follow all the settings? Max file per process. This thing. Actually, our experts started paying attention to this parameter quite recently. I'd like to mention that Postgres has come to 1C quite recently. 1C is 25 years old. Actually, 1C has maintained Postgres for a long time, but about 2 or 3 years ago, according to unofficial data, the number of installations of client-server on Postgres was less than 1% from all client-server 1C. Last year, according to unofficial sources, the number of installations grew by 20%. So, the number of complaints and feedback increased as well, and whereas issues appeared, for example, this one max file process, by default in Postgres settings it is 1000. Actually, by its name you can understand the number of files that can be simultaneously opened in one process, and it turned out in 1C 1000 files is nothing. If normal database has 10 tables in principle plus 20 indices, but a typical ERP has 12,000 tables and 50,000 indices, even more. And in Postgres, every ratio is a separate file. I mean that we have 60,000 files when we download configuration into ERP, an empty one, and if we start recording data then every gigabyte of data will create another file. Postgres doesn't store one file more than 1 gigabyte. They actually like comparing the databases and the amount of terabytes of tables, and even in a terabyte base you have about 100,000 files. And it's not obvious that actually you would write a very neat query that would take only 1,000 files. Frequently, it takes much more. And once again, actually nothing terrible would happen. Postgres will work out this query, but it will work it out in a slower way than in case this setting is used. Why? Because it will always try to close unnecessary processes. So that is about the decrease of the impact of background processes on the work of database, because actually the database should service your query. It shouldn't be working with background processes only. And I can see that if we enlarge it, it won't help, and it has one more setting. In etc security, there is a limit file. It has 1000. You can enter it and specify that it should have 10,000, and actually I can show it to you. I think that was even specified. Wait a bit. So I do not use any fast buttons. I do it on purpose for you to understand it. It's as if we are in Windows now. Here it is. So you can enter it and specify it. Unfortunately, here it's not about processes, it's about users. So Postgres is enabled from Postgres user, 100,000 files. You can even specify 1 million here. Who has ever tried to enable the storage of 1C configuration on Linux? Did it work? Did you write ETS article before launching it? And what was the limit specified there? 500,000. It was 500,000. So this is about 1C. For the storage of configurations to work, and what is a storage? Well, actually, this is one file base. So one C file is there. But let's imagine that we have uploaded it in XML. That is 60,000 files, not more. For it to work normally, one C has to generate a real flow of files. So for it to work on Linux, we should have 500,000. So don't be embarrassed. This is a production of Linux. You can write 1 million, and in that case, you will forget about this limit. But actually, I know no side effects. It's turned from it. Probably disk system will be crashed somewhere, but actually it will be crashed in case of any type of setting. So let's move on. Vacuum cost limit. That is 8-core server. A good practice is to permit the vacuum to have the number of processes that are equal to half of cores. Many people do that, but they forget about one thing: increasing the limit set up. By default it is 200, and by default it is for 3 kernels, for 3 cores. And for the computation to be easier, you should consider that the limit is 100 for one kernel, 100 points, 100 scores. What is it about? You can read the documents. Every action of the vacuum is evaluated by a score. It read a page. That is 1 score. It cleared the page of the data that does not exist now. That is 2 scores or 5 scores. It can be set. So it accumulates the scores, and now it has 200 scores by default. All the processes, these are scores for all the processes, That is the total amount of scores, not for one process. So when this figure is up, all the processes of vacuum and auto vacuum will be paused.
So the pause can be regulated in the settings. So not to go too deep into the settings, not to try be cleverer than the database developers and change the settings. So change the limit according to the cores. Otherwise, if you change the cores, it will not help. You'll have a lot of cores, 8 processes, but they will pause so often that 2 processes could be more effective. Just remember it. It is not difficult. PG writers unit. Remember background processes. There is a background process which processes records, buffers from dirty pages. It cleans dirty pages. By default, it is set very democratically not to do nothing, almost nothing. In 1C world, we rely on different types of data. In the buffer, things change continuously. Imagine a website. It is not Bittrex, it is 1C. Let's imagine a regular website with dozens of tables. If it is a trading floor website, right, then we place tables for the balances of products. So it is in the buffer, do not touch it. In 1C, without 12,000 tables and 60,000 indexes, the DBA will create itself faster. So how long will the buffer be living? That's why this background process has a lot of work to do. It cleans stuff. Bits of data gets there, gets old very quickly, gets obsolete. What happens if we turn off this process? We do not understand what it does. Let's turn it off. This is a favorite thing to do in 1C. Let's turn it off and see what happens. Nobody is reading guidelines. So if you turn it off, the main process will be busy cleaning cache. It will get in cache and see how dirty it is and starts cleaning. It will stop your query, first clean everything, remove all the dirty stuff, and only then take care of a query. Do not let the main process of the database do the cleanup. Let's move on. This is Postgres 11, I forgot to tell you. In 10 and 9, this is not available. Main test worker. In Postgres 11, a great thing has been introduced, which can parallel the process of create index. You set it once, install half of the cores, and your restructuring and DT loading will be as fast as MS SQL. Postgres used to be slowed 2 to 4 times at the create index process. Now the issue is resolved. In concept, Postgres is organized so that one Postgres index should process only one database. In 1C, it is different. Check your database and see that. But if this is the case, if there is one instant and one database, and DT loading is a monopoly operation, then we can recover 80% of the CPU cores. If create index is done, nobody does anything. This is a one-stream process. Do you know how DT is loaded? What does the business process look like? You don't know? 5 seconds, I will show you. Let me just take a sip of water for courage and tell you. Can you imagine the configuration tree? So open the configuration to see the configuration tree, to see the metadata. So it is not by alphabet. It is. So how does DT load it? First, commands are issued to create a table. Imagine you see the metadata tree, create table, create 12,000 ERP tables. You do not create any indexes. This comes in one stream, one flow. Then the operation of insert is performed. A lot of inserts, one by one. So indexes are not yet existing in the database, I mean. When the platform gets to the tables, there is the config table, which you do not see in the configuration tree. So in that table, in that configuration table, you can see everything, all the indexes. There is also a parameter table explaining who is who and what is what. That you have the directory corresponding to the table in the database. So the configuration is loaded, the tables are created, then insert comes into play, and only then the platform generates the command create index, going by one stream through the configuration. Vasily? So in my experience, I've seen the following. The database slows down for some reason. Yesterday, everything worked fine. Today, it slows down. So we understand that yesterday, someone did a good thing, a very good thing. They uploaded and downloaded DT. Upload, download sometimes slows down. So people believe that if you log on and log off, everything will cure. But for some reason, some bad thing happens. We saw this in MS SQL and Postgres. What is it? So the database just freezes. Configuration opens up. Users can access the database, but any action, any process takes forever. It is 5 minutes instead of a couple of seconds. It is on big databases, not for 100 records. So this is the DT loading process. So what happened, do you think? Why? It is because of indexing. No, if the indexing is in place, you will not get access to it. Any other thoughts? So create index is ongoing, and while it is ongoing, you cannot enter the database. But in our case, users can enter the database, but it is very, very slow. So what would be the reason for that? We always activate auto vacuum. So the problem is that the indexes have not been created. Why? The RP host failed as DT was loaded. DTs are huge. You need to upload and download them. And once Cs are slow and dreaming, they do packet downloading, uploading, but without analyzing the results whatsoever. They forget this parameter. Dump result, which should generate 0 if it is successful, and something else if it is a failure. So they forget to write it, then go to sleep, come back to work in the morning. The database opens up, things are good, DT has been loaded, but the database freezes because for some reason we like to have processes rebooted once a day in 1C. Somebody likes rebooting once every 3 hours. A DT can be loaded for 10 hours, remember that. So in 3 hours, the database was able to upload the data, but not to create indexes, and it is hard to trace it. Why? Because when you enter the configurator, when you open up the metadata, at every measure, each register, so indexes are checked out. So everything is in place, but nothing is working. The config table was created from the very start, but the database doesn't know about it. So always select, always scan table. It does not contain indexes. Please pay attention to that. We've had those cases several times. This was a different story, but I just wanted to tell you that in version 11 Postgres is really good. So, a favorite toy of mine, I will call every one of you 1C operators. In the 1C world, there are very few companies where there are two different roles. The 1C developer, the 1C server administrator, and the 1C database administrator. Usually it is one and the same person, a 1C person. This is 1C which is not working, then this is you who is responsible. Who is the ones who are 1C server administrator, or it's great that your company has 3 different roles instead of 1. Let us turn on the multi-streaming. MS SQL, 0 means multi-streaming, equal number of cores. And in Postgres, 0 means turn off multi-streaming. Maybe it was done on purpose. So for some reason, the digit 1 doesn't turn it down, only 0 turns it down. What I'm trying to say, 1C is the PT load. So being parallel is prohibited in certain updates of single records, continuous reports big and small. Parallelism is very harmful, is very bad for the system. We recently dealt with a database where things were really slow, although the DT has been uploaded properly. The problem was that on MS they had 8 parallel things. So it was losing time to consolidate the results of treating queries of 8 cores. So the time of processing was longer than if it had been done on 1 core. So in ERP, they sometimes had 2 hours of processing per 1 SKU. When the parallelism was turned off at SQL, it took 3 minutes. So this is how long consolidation may take. So don't turn it off, don't have parallelism. You can do it overnight if you calculate the costs overnight. Turn it on, do the script for the night time when there are no users, when the costs are analyzed. These are big data. So, and turn it off at 7 o'clock, 7 a.m. So your cost analysis will be twice as fast overnight. But first turn on 2 cores, then add 2 more. And when the speed stops going up, then go back to the original number. When the speed doesn't go up any longer, come back to the previous step, to the previous number of cores. The next parameter is 1 level. So by default it is a replica. You can keep it. It doesn't impose any additional load. But if you're not planning on replication of this server, there is only one server, the developer server, where you cannot plan replication. All the others do need replication. So on that server, say it's a minimum, ifsimcon. I've been telling this for 4 years. Those who have turned it off, they're doomed and cursed. Top 1. This is the top 1 question about slowing down of 1S at Postgres. Turn it off, things will fly. Up to the first blackout or supply interruption, electric supply interruption. Even if you have batteries, still do not turn it on. If suddenly the speed suddenly goes up, that means you have issues with the hardware. Your hardware does not comply with the loads. Replace the disks with the good ones. Do not believe in SAS. They are not good anymore. So use PCI Express. Commit off. By default, it is also turned on, but you can turn it off at your own risk. What is it? What are those 2 parameters? And how to work with them? How do we make records in Postgres, in MS, in the database? It takes place in 2 phases. Let's skip all the operation system buffers, disk buffers. Let's imagine all the buffers are transparent, otherwise it will take 5 steps. Let's imagine there are 2 steps. First, write it in the transaction log. There is a separate file in MS SQL. What is it called? I forgot. LGF, I think. First, when you insert or update or change the record in any way, record it in the transaction log. Only after it has been recorded, imagine the buffer is transparent. So when the system has responded, confirming that it has been recorded, then the transaction is considered completed. SF Sync is responsible for it. It guarantees that your data have already been stored in the transaction log. It means that if today suddenly there is the electric supply interruption on the server and it turns down immediately, when Postgres is started, it will play all the data which was not available in the database. It will synchronize everything. It will know which line of time was recorded in the database, check it, and say, we're ahead 2 seconds. So play everything for the previous 2 seconds. You will not lose the data on the completed transactions. If there was an interruption when the recording is in place and the commit has not been received, then forget about it. It will be lost. If Sync guarantees it. Synchronize commit. What does it guarantee? It guarantees that the data has been recorded in the database. In the database itself. So transactions will take longer. Who is it good for? For banks, financial institutions? For whom guaranteed records are important. In 99% of cases and installations, it is not necessary. You can turn it off. But have batteries in place for the backup. At least have the uninterrupted power supply for the servers. You may have a great battery, but a very poor adapter, and then it will not help. So, if you turn it off, the speed will go up, but do it at your own risk. Actually, you can do it on the developer's server, and you can do anything on the developer's server. But to be honest, I would turn it on, because the slower the hardware, the developer's hardware, the better is the code. They should operate on the dead servers. And then everything is going to be all right. Let us speed up a little bit.
We're a bit late. Commit delay. Actually, this setting was described quite a long time ago, but we frequently forget about it. This is another setup that influences backup process. So to say, this is a pause in microseconds, so that is 1 millisecond, and during this pause, the process of recording intervals is paused. So this is a rest to your disks. They have 1 millisecond rest, and after that the recording is resumed, but it works together with another setting. So the number of active transactions should be not more than 5. Yes. And if the number of transactions is more than 5, it doesn't freeze. When you have active work with the base, everything is in long line. And if you work with the base in a passive way, this system can have a rest. This setting makes it possible. What is the risk here? We can lose the data during 1 millisecond. So you understand that they didn't reach the walls. They were committed, these transactions were committed, but they didn't reach the walls. Well, you can use 100. It will be how much? That will be 100 microseconds data loss. Actually, one C company recommends 1000. That is normal. You can use it. Checkpoint timeout. I already mentioned shared buffers. They are large. For every checkpoint of the system, we have to analyze the whole shared buffer and we have to drop it to clear it from dirty data. By default, it is 5 minutes. It is recommended to enlarge it for 15, 20 or 30 minutes. Why? If you set PG writer, we actually discussed it already, then actually you don't have to do anything about checkpoints. But in case of very active exchange, so for example, the exchange failed, then PG writer will not cope with this volume. And if you have once per 5 minutes, once in 5 minutes, the exchange will pause. So it can have some rest. Once per 15 minutes, it will drop checkpoints. Cooperation is very difficult for the disk subsystem. This operation is really difficult and it's better to have it more seldom. I don't mean once per 24 hours, although the documents for Postgres Pro states that it's possible to have it once a day, but you need to really understand what you do, and for mass installations 15 minutes is normal. Max wall size, mean wall size. Once again, this is a guideline for the database. This is the volume that should be occupied by the folder of logs or transactions. It doesn't mean that when it is 4 gigabytes, the recording will stop and the server will stop. No, it can record 10 terabytes there, but the problem is, well, actually here you can see the indicators by default, very small, 1 gigabyte. The problem is that as soon as the system is close to the maximum indicator max wall size, actually the voluntary checkpoint works out. So it is not actually reasonable to specify a low indicator here, mean wall size. That is another background process. It has to continuously computate whether all replicas have taken this data or not, whether all transactions have been committed or not, and if we have it by default, it will be computed until this folder weighs 80 megabytes. Actually, the place on disks is one of the cheapest resources now. You can allocate more space here, 2 to 4 megabytes. That's actually, it doesn't really matter anything for you. You can do that. Checkpoint completion target. By default, it is 0.5. What is it? Evaluating coefficient, and the next pack of data from the buffer for checkpoint. How much will it be? 0.5 by default. So the database thinks that the next pack of data will be twice less than the current one. That's not true for 1C. So it means that if we started working with a quarter, it will take us quite a lot of time. So it is better to tell the system that if we started changing actively, we won't be able to finish fast. It will take us a long time. That's for the plan only, just to understand what the planner should do. Max wall centers. Why did I represent this setting separately? Actually, on the top we saw a replica. This thing, we saw it on the top. And actually this replica can work only with max wall center. If you put 0 here, max wall center 0, then the system will not start at all in case of replica wall level. It actually will write to the log of the operative system, not to the log of Postgres. And in Windows, looking for these instances, actually the log of instances and application, actually it will write you in Russian that if the level of wall replica, max wall center, cannot be, well, I don't know, cannot be less than 1, as I remember. That's why I decided to specify it here. Remember that it is necessary. On the other hand, If we put minimum wall level now, then the system will not start either. It will write in the opposite way. It will state that if it is minimum, it cannot be equal to 0, because this is a background process. So please remember it. Many people forget about it. They don't understand why Postgres isn't launched. So they say, I just changed the level of the log and Postgres cannot be enabled because of that. And there is a pool of parameters in Postgres related to the planner, what it can do and what it can't do. And one of such parameters is enable match join. By default, it is of void. You don't really have to do anything about that. 1C before every query says set enable join off, and after that it fulfills the query, and the platform itself disables this parameter in every query. And why do I recommend you to turn it off? For example, you received SQL query from technical log, and in the console of queries from 1C it is fulfilled within 2 seconds, and from pgadmin it is fulfilled within 40 seconds, because by default it is on, for example, and the planner will select query plan with merge join, and it will be much slower. So for you to have similar results, both if you address directly to SQL or if you address it from the platform, you want to have it similar, you should switch it off. Unfortunately, it is not documented. You can actually see it. A cool parameter sec page cost and random page cost, 2 parameters. These are top 2 queries that make 1C on Postgres slow. What do they say? 1C is slow on Postgres. Sec page cost should be 0.1 instead of 1, and in that case it will really fly. And indeed, one report will fly that used to be slow, but actually the problem is different. First of all, documentation states that sec page cost is an arbitrary scale. What does it mean? It means that this is the parameter that actually is a guideline for all other parameters. And there are a lot of parameters there. So in terms of these scores, how much does an operation cost? It can cost 25, 10,000, so it's like 0.00025. What is it? So it is actually related to this parameter. The cost of sequential reading from the disk. So we accepted that the cost of sequential reading of the disk is 1, and we actually agreed that processor operation is much faster than reading from the disk. And when we state 0.1, we told the system that the processor is really stupid. For example, it became 10 times slower. There are a lot of parameters here, and why is the query slow? I can explain it to you. So why did it become fast after that? It actually was appropriate. It doesn't lie. It was changed, and after that, actually it worked really fast. Why? It is slow because random page cost by default is 4.0, and in early versions it was 8, if I'm not wrong. So the speed of random access to the disk is 4 times slower than the speed of consecutive access to the disk. You understand what I mean, right? This is the block where we need to tell the system what our disks are. Actually, this author stated that it was 8. And when this author used 0.1 on top of it instead of 1, this 8 became 0.8. And the planner made a query so that it said, oh, Your disks are fast for random reading, and it worked fast. The report worked fast, and what actually should have been done here? It was necessary to tell the system what kind of disks you have. If it is SSD, that is 1.3, that is approximate, that is just evaluated parameter 1.3, so the speed of random access is almost similar. If you have NVMe, you can use 1.1, for example. If you have SATA or SAS, that is 2.0. If you have SATA, that is 4.0. So on the whole, you know it by yourself, just approximately. You can understand how random access is slower than consecutive one, but actually approximate figures are present. And actually now the database should be on SSD, that's it. That's why 1.1, 1.3, that's what you can use, and after that you can just forget about other parameters. Effective cache size. It's almost similar to shared buffer, but on the whole, this is an evaluated amount of short-term memory that can be occupied by the whole system of Postgres in your system. Once again, this is an evaluation of the plan. It doesn't really mean anything. Well, I mean that it doesn't mean that when this indicator is reached, it will stop. No, it won't stop because there are other parameters, lots of them, but it will write to log, and after that, when it becomes critical, it will actually state that short-term memory is not sufficient. The server will not be stopped, but your query will be crashed. 75% of short-term memory will be sufficient, and it actually does not cancel the setting of your monitoring system to the volume of short-term memory. Yes, shared buffer 25%, and that is 75%, or total short-term memory minus shared buffer. If, apart from Postgres, the short-term memory isn't used for anything else, there are no 1C servers on my page. Another cool thing, top 3. From Collapse Limit and Join Collapse Limit. Top 3 bad recommendations if it is slow. And unfortunately on ETS the indicator is 20. Now I would like to show you. So if I manage to launch Chrome fast, I would like to show you factorials table. Actually, that is about factorials. This is the table 8. 40,320 variants. This is the number of variants that can be found if you put 8 cubes in different ways. 40,320. Let's take the recommendation of 1C. I don't even know how to pronounce this number. That is a lot, really a lot. And on the web, actually, it is recommended to enlarge it up to 80. I didn't even find a website with this number. Actually, it finishes with 50 here. Moreover, if we read the documents of Postgres, it actually states that there is another parameter, gecko limit, that is equal to 12 by default. And Postgres is guided by these two parameters only if they are less than gecko. So, just putting it in a simple way, if in one query you have less or equal to 8 froms, then the planner will actually replace this froms 40,320 times, and 40,320 times it will recalculate the cost of the plan, and it will select the plan with the least cost. If you have 9 froms, at least 9 froms, so that is actually less than 12, then the planner will think, well, actually this query was written by a genius. Uniting 9 tables is really cool. So it means that you should do it in the order it was written. Regarding joint, it is similar, but if it has 12, then DBMS will think that even a genius cannot calculate the plan of query. We should switch to Giga mode. Giga mode is a probability assessment. It is less accurate, but it is faster. Well, you just saw that if you have 12, then there would be so many options. It's not even possible. And the query is fast, point one, but if, for example, you switch off this from collapse limits and if the Giga is up, if, for example, you can put 1 here, then the planner will never actually check anything. It will be the way you have written, and probably this is an appropriate solution, probably. But in the world of 1C, actually, no one codes configuration from scratch. You cannot be responsible for the whole code of standard configuration. That's why let's DBMS to think instead of you. Have 8 here. Unfortunately, well, actually, this is the only parameter regarding which I would like to argue with ATS. They stated 20. I don't know why, because it will be switched off if it is more than 12. Who needs these 20? Probably they didn't read the documents up to the end. Probably we don't know something, but actually you shouldn't play with these parameters 8. But if you have 4 gigahertz, up to 4 gigahertz, 3.9 for example, you can use 16, but remember to increase Gecko up to 20, so you can put it and test it. So regarding the approach to speed testing, actually we'll speak about it a bit later when we move on to enterprise. I will tell you about the way I see this approach, because testing one report, so it was slow, now it is fast. And now it's product. Actually, that is bad. You can do that. You can't do that, no. I mean that if you added 18 indices and amended 15 settings of Postgres and it started to work fast. Let's move on. Log mean duration statement. This is a very simple thing. You know it. That is minimum number. Minimum amount of time after which log is recorded. That is 10 seconds. I mean that all the queries of DBMS with duration of 10 seconds will be in the log of Postgres. This is useful to work with problems. After that, we have log line prefix. Prefix of every string in the log. By default, it is M and P. M is the moment of time, milliseconds. Not even milliseconds, in that case it is normal hours, minutes, and seconds. That is milliseconds. P is peak of the process that generated the log, and actually that is useless for working with log in 1C. This prefix is useless. You have more than one base on the server in 99% of cases. So it is better to have and DD is the name of the database. I mean that you will see the database where this query was made. And I also recommend writing some word in the beginning so that it will be possible for you to look for another query fast. In normal applications, you never have queries for 160 screens. But in 1C, this is normal. You will not actually scroll all of them. One query can be 10 megabytes of text. That is the list of queries.
It is hard to search it by date. Just write any word. Write any word. And then your search will jump from one query to another, to the next one. Auto vacuum off. I wanted to tell you about it. Do not do this. Do not do this. Auto vacuum off. Really bad. A nightmare. This can be done in some instances. Number one, on our developers' servers, on our favorite ones. Why? They do so many wild things there. If you put auto vacuum on it too, it will be really bad. So you will have a hard time finding a budget for new servers. So turn it off on other servers and do it at night. Do vacuum, do freeze. Read about the freeze. That's a cool thing to do. On product servers, you can turn off the vacuum, the auto vacuum. When? When is it possible? When can we turn off auto vacuum at product servers together with the power supply? At recovery? What is recovery? Good. Yes, when you dump, yes, you can do it. On your upload DTs, you can temporarily turn off auto vacuum. You can do this. Why? You will not accumulate as much information as you disturb the recovery. So, for instance, the table is being inserted and the system starts analyzing it. So you just strain the cores on the disks. But in a normal operating product system, the auto vacuum should be on, should be turned on. There are a lot of settings around auto vacuum. I'm sure everyone knows it, but let me reiterate it. When in 1S you remove a record, you mark it before you remove it. And then there is a separate procedure, delete the records identified for deletion. It's the same here, the same thing here. You mark it as to be deleted, nothing happens in the database, you only check the box. Then you press delete those marked for deleted. In Postgres, they have been marked for delete. And only auto vacuum will be able to delete them really in Postgres. So for 1S users to understand it. Without this, it will not be possible. I have so many disks, you may think, well, let it be the way it is. But the problem is that it is swelling and swelling. And there is no guarantee that all data fits into one page of 8 kilobytes, or it fits the equal number of pages, the integer number of pages. There may be some shifts or incompletes. Then a new record begins on the same page because the system tries saving space. So you'll have a lot of holes in the end. But you'll have to draw the full page. And on one page there might be only 1 byte of useful information, and 7 kilobytes are useless. Deleted but not clean vacuum of data. Also, those pages are not vacant, so they cannot be used again. Auto vacuum parameters. You can talk about it forever. Auto vacuum parameters. Half of the cores, give them to it. Not time, 20 seconds. How often should it be restarted? Once every 20 seconds, the processes will be started, if they had time to be finalized within those 20 seconds. Vacuum. It's hard to say how to translate it from English into Russian. Basically, it's how many data needs to be changed on the page for the vacuum to operate. Postgres has confused everyone. Point 2 means 20% of data needs to be changed for the auto vacuum to pay attention to and clean it. It's a lot. In 1S, it is a lot. Do you remember recommendations for MSQL? Statistics should be always full scan and do a rebuild of indices. It's the same, it's very similar. Cleaning should take place more often. And the second factor is how to analyze statistics. By default, 10%, but we transferred or converted into 0.5%. 1C loves fresh statistics. Let me draw an example. For instance, we kept the statistics at 10% and calculated the results. The table has grown 9%. The outcome table has grown 9%, but the database knows nothing about it. It doesn't know about the distribution of data, about the indexes. With that, in 1C, those outcomes are dated at January the 31st. And those are the balances. So we request about the balances as of today, February the 3rd. 1C builds a query to the database on the basis of the outcomes, on the results. Please provide the data from the performance as of January the 31st, if the current is turned off. So what will happen? 1C is confident that the results are available. It's not the database. The planner has no idea those data are available. It makes a query, and he will get the table scan of the plan, knowing nothing about periods and indexes appropriate to those periods. It doesn't know that it has happened. It's a classical case. On MS2, the same thing will happen when statistics is analyzed on the basis of the monthly results. It's a classic example. This schedule was scheduled at 2 o'clock, and the results were calculated at 3 a.m. So in the morning, when it comes to work, the database is frozen. This is what will happen. And one more parameter, cause delay, auto vacuum. You remember the score scale? How much it will recover? By default, 20 milliseconds. For normal databases, it is good. For 1C database, we have 60,000 objects, roughly. Calculate even 4 auto vacuums, 4 processors. They will be accumulating scores, stopping 2 milliseconds each. As a minimum, they will be not moving for 120,000 milliseconds as a minimum. Well, the parameter may be launched every 20 seconds. So if one process is fast and is done within 1 second, it doesn't do anything with another during another 19 seconds. It's because 1C has a lot of objects, and I told you a scary story about one database. And now remember what your servers look like. They have at least 20 databases. Some have 100, some 10, some more than 100. So multiply those seconds by those numbers. So it will take 200 minutes for 20 databases. So the statistics, the history will be old, stale. So database administrator has a lot of work to do here. They need to understand which tables through Chrome should be updated through statistics. Should have statistics updated. This is work for DBAs. So do analyze of the full server every night, every evening. Yes, it will work up to the first restructuring. So that's why I do it with cron. It is more transparent, it is more visible, reliable, and stable. With that, please understand that when I say at night, it doesn't mean 1 minute past midnight. First, let all the regulations of 1S take place. So the better you analyze the statistics, the better the database will behave. So if users come to work at 8 a.m., statistics analysis takes 1 hour, then launch it at 7 a.m. At night doesn't mean 1 minute past midnight. Moving on, a very easy parameter, row security. This is a must. Do not move it to RLS, row level security, to the database. Turn it off, just turn it off. This will remove one more background query. The magic of 1C will begin, without which nothing will work. Don't forget, by the way, I don't know why you don't do it in assembly by default. Maybe because it wasn't created for 1C, but even at 1C postgres.ru, and when you follow all the guidelines, this setting is not available. Patches that were developed by them, they somehow don't use it. For some reason. Why do you do this? Here are the guys sitting on the first row. Maybe they will improve. For 1C to operate with Postgres Pro, represented by Fyodor Sigaeva, wrote 2 patches, even more, 5 patches. So it will work poorly without those 2. It will start, but will operate poorly. Without those 2 parameters, it will work too, but I will tell you what it will do without those 2 parameters. Those 2 parameters, online analyze, I will tell you what it is. By default, Postgres does not update statistics as it is understood by MC on temporary tables. I explained why. A good developer can't create a table with more than 1,000 records. I will be able to read it. 1C creates tables with billions, and there you will die without statistics. And you sometimes write index by. So Postgres doesn't care about index as long as online analyzer doesn't see it. It has no idea it exists. So turn on the patches and set as auto vacuum. In the table you should have at least 50 records. If you change 10% of records, do statistics again. So 55 plus statistics. Do not forget to turn it on here. Do not forget to put on here. It would be a big mistake if you don't. So you enter online analyzer equals 0. Why? Because at the assembly that you download from 1S, it is turned off. They forgot to include it in the preload shared library, but they turned it on for some reason. Turned it off for some reason. It was turned off for about 4 hours, for 4 years. If you correct it, it's good. Then suddenly, 1C at Postgres started working much faster. Turn off detailed reports. Only developers need it. Minimal intervals. This patch is now used not only in 1C globally. It is used widely. Why should a DBA think about which table to analyze more frequently? He would put all here and do online analyze with all database tables. and the system just freezes. Do it temporary, put it as temporary for 1C. If you don't, you will have issues. No hardware will sustain it if you don't do it. This is about online analyze. And now about one tune. Postgres originally was very pessimistic about newly created tables. Patches corrects this pessimism to optimism. Read about it in the guidelines, in the manual. Maybe someone can comment on what it means to treat it pessimistically. So, in other words, turn the plan tuner on. Andrei put it correctly. Without those parameters, the system will launch. In general, 1C will be launched and will work, and even release the numbers, but be slow. But with those two parameters, we had this issue, although we didn't expect it. We didn't expect that Postgres version 10, those parameters in the one as assembly of Postgres Pro, they were, for some reason, they were on, not off. This is screening of a symbol only. Only just screening of a symbol. There is some type of data with a lot of symbols. If you don't turn it off, you will be surprised to see what balances you will get in the turnover table. Sometimes you will not be able to process a query. It will never end. You will get nonsense. So it's important. And the final parameter, and then we will have the Q&A session. Max log per transaction. Back to the 1C database architecture. There are so many tables, and Postgres does not forgive mistakes to developers. So developers thought if this bad guy tried in one query to block 64 tables, more than 64 tables, generate an error and tell him or her take an exam. For 1C, it is a normal situation, up to 256. Otherwise, your ERP will never calculate the costs. So many tables will be blocked, and you will have mistakes. A small story. Why should we use Postgres stories? Why can't we download Postgres works? There are 3 more patches written in Postgres Pro, allowing 1C to work with the database. 1C uses n-word char. It is non-existent in Postgres. It was simply written in those assemblies, in any builds for 1C. MS SQL, in violation of the standard, of the SQL standard at sorting out, puts null to on top, but it should be at the bottom, if not vice versa. So Postgres worked according to the standard. When the 1C database was launched according to a standard, it failed because the platform expects 0 or null to be on top, and it is at the bottom. So they wrote one more patch to make Postgres work not according to the standard. And patch number 3, I don't quite remember what it was. Fast truncate is a fresh patch. I will tell you about it. Full connection on Postgres. I think it is replaced with something. So fast truncate is a recent patch. temp table. So fast cleaning of temp table. It doesn't write into the Postgres metadata. So it works faster with temporary tables. Well, timing is really bad today. We should have had a WhatsApp break. Would you like to have it for 5 minutes? Let's do it. Yes, let's have it. So we are running really late. Pavel's question. One SMS SQL migration to Postgres. Yes. Upload, download DT, or log on, log off DT. It works if you set it properly. There is no best practice. It is DT. How to fix the DT, which was not loaded properly. Well, it depends on which phase you had that failure. What could help you is re-indexing. You don't need to upload anything. The platform goes through metadata and can help you. Dump has never had those indexes. It doesn't rely on the configuration tables. DT loading in 1C, can it done in parallel? No, it is a one flow, one stream. 1C is a one stream system, and it shouldn't be other way. And why would you need it? To create tables in several flows? Well, tables are very much related in terms of data. One table has references to other tables. There is a very big risk of inconsistency of data after recovery. 1C is not the database management system. It's different. Another question: how virtualization influences productivity of PostgreSQL? It doesn't affect it anyway. Just provide honest resources. Let me put it differently. Why do we need virtualization, and how do Russians use it? It's interesting. Virtualization was invented for full-fledged utilization of big servers. You buy a big server, put operating system on it, and the domain controller. You cannot put RDP on it for users, although people do it. The 1C service, so you can't really put the web server on it. So in other words, you have powerful hardware with a utilization rate of 2%. So virtualization is great for that issue. The main idea was that the cumulative power of all virtual machines by cores and by everything cannot exceed the power, the capacity of the host. What do the Russians do it? the 16-core server. They deploy 92 virtuals of 4 cores each and 16 gigabytes of operating memory. And when you ask why, the IT administrator says it works. So what I'm saying is that provide honest resources. On benchmarks, you will see the differences, but benchmarks and real Operation 1C are two different planets, two different things. Do you need a server for operation or for Helio test? You answer this question first and then do your settings. I was trying to convince you. Maybe the test should be different. Yes, there is a different test. It is called standard loading testing from 1C, but there 1C requires a different thing there. It asks to launch the full environment with client parts. So if you are planning a user to use terminal service, then for the test, you should allocate terminal servers for 500 users, launch 500 clients, and this will all be measured by the test. If you have 10% of remote branches, it's like a fax machine. A fax machine is no longer used, so the terminal should be no longer used. So please rewrite it. So the fax machine is not used, but we use scanners and emails. So if 10% of users use terminals and the others use virtual machines, put 90 computers and they will operate as background environment. So it is doing a different thing. You simply measure the speed of a database with the load that you will never have. What point does it make, this test? It has nothing to do with reality. Reality is different. Let me give you a bright example. Any desktop or laptop will show 80 parrots by Guillaume test. And a 32-core server with appropriate capabilities with MS or with Postgres will show only 25 parrots. Does it mean that my laptop, on my laptop we can launch 3.5 more, 3 times more users than on your server? No. So as long as it doesn't correlate with the conclusion and with the test, on which basis you create your infrastructure, as long as you don't have it, this test is not accurate whatsoever. So test your own database with your data and with your infrastructure, and not something non-existent. And then at the forums, I read 120 parrots, and it still slows down. It's because your server has been set for the parrots, not for humans. So another question. So about the scheduler. The scheduler doesn't know your hardware. So you speak in terms of settings, but it needs to decide what is cheaper: to improve the index, to read the table, to connect those froms 4,000 times. It reads the settings time and again. So by statistics, they have a different number of columns and entries. This is a classic database. It is not yet colon store. Even if you need one cell out of this line, it will retrieve the full line, the full string from it.
Если эта строка еще разбита, она разбита вот так по диску или фрагментирована, то достанутся все страницы.
So if the string is broken, then you'll get all the bytes from that string. So the disk speed is the most important parameter. So it all boils down to the disks and illiteracy of administrators as far as the database is concerned. Another question. Alexei, a comment. Postgres Pro Engineer. It is better to set in system D. Have you heard it? If you launch Postgres via PGConf, then the settings will not be read. Oh, vice versa, right. So the settings are in two different places. So set in two different places. How do you diagnose max file per transaction? Do you see the log PG problem? Do you see it in the log PG? This is a question from Mikhail. In PG log, you will see nothing. Simply your speed will go down. It was diagnosed by Postgres Pro engineers. So they see there were too many letters and say it is here, the issue is here. I am not a database developer. I do not know the original Postgres code and I don't want to know it. I'm an operator, I'm not a developer. Therefore, this issue will only cause the system to go down. You will see nothing in the log.
I don't know if it is planned to write it in the log. You know, it's normal behavior of the system. The limit was reached. It means that we need to open it once again. And most likely, these instances will happen so frequently that you will filter it in the log and will not react. Does it mean synchronized commit on? Does it mean that the inclusion is directly without buffer? No, this is another line of control. And when we have data, we have it when we decide transaction to be committed. Oh, Vasily, that's a lot actually here. Please send me the manual. Yes, I will. And file of vacant place and visibility file so that we can multiply the number of files by 3 indeed, but they're so small that they're processed really fast. But actually we should multiply them by 4. Well, I will read it now. I will give you a funny example. You know, I have known Enterprise for 4 or 5 months. So we managed to get it and use real data. And after trials, we were faced with some problems. They gave me contact data of Konstantin Knizhnik. He is a developer of Postgres Pro. I just wanted to tell you that developers are really weird people. So I asked him something, he specified it, and you know, in his answer he wrote the following. He said, yes, this word is even a new word in Russian language. So I said that I didn't actually understand how it works. Listen to his response. He said, yes, but actually it is not compaction, that is compactification. But compactification is such a weird word that in the previous letter I decided to use compaction instead of it. Now try to reread the previous letter and understand what he actually meant. So when we see Postgres Pro Enterprise, I will actually introduce a new word to your vocabulary, that is compactification. Please don't confuse it with differentification. So we should multiply the files by 4 if we use Enterprise. Every inode takes several kilobytes on the hard drive. Yes, actually files are more numerous, much more numerous, but it is inside, and we're guided by the number of tables and indices. The number of descriptors is limited in 1C. The rarer you have checkpoints, the longer the recovery after crash takes. We will discuss it when we discuss replication and recovery. Indeed, in all the settings, there are two sides of the coin. So, on the one hand, we drop background process, but on the other hand, we actually mess up with something. Look here, all of you are MS SQL experts on 1C, and when is it possible to have recovery in MS SQL for any second when you have an archive of transaction log? And when do you have the archive of transaction log? When you remembered to enable the regulation of transaction log and MS SQL does checkpoint instead of you there, and after that it writes to you. This is similar. If you set checkpoint once per 3 hours, then the recovery after this long checkpoint will take a lot of time. That is similar to a situation when in MS you set checkpoint once per 3 hours, but on the whole this is a logical thing. Well, I cannot actually tell you everything, although my masterclass takes 3 hours, but if you want me to tell you everything, you can stay here for 3 days. I just want to share with you some key aspects that are quite confusing, and I'm quite nervous now, that's why I can make a mistake when presenting. You should take the documentation. So what did we do in the past? We started using Postgres on 9.2 version in 1C, and documentation was not translated into Russian, it was English only. But when we actually made it work, and when we understood what this parameter means, although before that we read the documentation, we actually started to do it in a different way, in the opposite way. So you read something, you realize that this parameter works in this way, but after that you start reading documentation, you read about this parameter, and only after that you understand it. So if now you read the documents, you won't understand anything. So if you read the documents without actually practical work, you won't understand it. The same is true about ATS regarding setting server cluster. And after that, I will ask you where you use scope and how to actually set the output of all the background processes. And you will explain it to me if you have never tried doing that, if you have never worked in it. Actually, you won't understand anything, you won't be able to explain it. And that is the way the documents are. Various what parameters influence the speed of updating. What is an update? An update is config save record in the table. So at first, that is an application on comparing and uniting. After that, config save should include everything we want to change, and only after that the database starts to work. And let's distinguish the updates. Actually, the updates that do not require restructurization do not influence database. So for a database, this is an instant operation, and all other pauses are at the level of application. Now we're speaking about an update that requires restructuring data. As I mentioned, What is data restructuring? It means that you create a table with ng and then with a new set of fields, because restructuring is about changing a set, and from the current table you copy the data to this table. After that, the current table is dropped and this table is renamed. So the operation drop and operation rename are instant. Now, actually, in this new table, indices are created: create index, and operation drop and operation rename are instant. Operation create index, I gave you the parameters. Now, you actually can calculate multi-threading for indices creation. It will be faster, and the longest operation is copy. I mean, copying from one table to the other. Unfortunately, 1C, as far as I remember, still uses SQL 97 standard to support the opportunity of working on MS SQL 2000. That's why no bulk insert are possible. Actually, in 1997, these operations did not exist, and that is a simple one thread, one string insert. And while 1C until 1C platform is changed, you are not able to influence it with any settings, but it can influence create index. Okay. How is it better to allocate checkpoints and valve parameters in cluster on Patroni? Tomorrow we will hear a wonderful presentation of Simon, actually, regarding the way he allocates certain cluster and Patroni, and this cluster actually worked on 1C, and I do not want actually to steal the limelight of Simon. Improving configuration for migration on Postgres. Are there any structures in 1C that should be changed in case of migration? Yes. The left connection with the section of the latest ones cannot be used. It should be rewritten, and on ATS actually you can find the section that is PostgreSQL, and in that section there are two aspects. Actually, it is emphasized what you need to rewrite so that it would be just as fast on Postgres as on MS. That is section of the latest with the residues and turnovers, and complete connection should be excluded. This is a long operation for Postgres. You should rewrite the code, and actually all typical configurations do not require to be rewritten. Not a single string of code. All standard configuration of 1C actually are written for Postgres, for them to work there. So, if I didn't manage to persuade you, 1C Fresh, if you don't know what it is, this is the largest cloud service business applications, but they declare that they're the largest in the world. Several million users. Everything is on Postgres. Complete Fresh on Postgres. I am an architect and user of one of the largest cloud systems of 1C in Russia, client server systems, Infostat. And actually there is another company that has much more than I do, but they have files system, and that is client server system, and everything has worked on Postgres for 4 years. It worked in a brilliant way. This is cloud system, and mostly 99% of cases these are standard configuration that are continuously updated. So twice a week our accounting is updated. Who knows 1C dialog? 1C dialog service. That is the service of interaction Skype from 1C actually. Yes, it is on Postgres. Everything is on Postgres actually. All 1C company is built on Postgres, and their clients are on MS. Natalia, have you used synchronous standby in your practice? If yes, what was the idle time? Yes, we used it, not because of the idle time. Look here, I can explain it to you. We didn't rejected because of idle time. The reason was different. Synchronous standby increases the probability of system arrest by the factor of 2. Why? In case of synchronous standby PostgreSQL, when standby node is switched off, will switch the system to the mode of reading only. And for 1C, this is a death. You won't be able to log in into the base. Even if you enter login and password in 1C, a temp table is created, but this will be prohibited. And this is the reason why it is not possible to work with a synchronous replica from 1C. So only if you connect it directly you can do that. That's why we actually rejected synchronous standby due to a different reason, not because of the delay, but the probability that product system will crash is twice higher. That's why we have asynchronous one. Probably she meant synchronous standby with automatic switch. Probably. Well, I'm answering the question that was asked, but if it was like that, tomorrow Simon will tell us about petronium. And what is the name actually? I forgot about it. No, when you actually tell someone about the end of the movie in advance, that is spoiler. That's right, spoiler. I have a very weird and very stringent stance regarding all failovers. An automaton can be switched to a spare one, but not to a reverse one. Only a human can switch to the reverse one. Only a human. I mean that there is a master and a slave, and when master is dead, it automatically goes to slave. But in the opposite direction, no. Admin should wake up and no cluster system should manage it. This is my deep stance. And if you have switches several times a day and your admins do not ever sleep, the system works really badly. You should use microservices. One big base is not for you. So you should fragment the base for several bases and you can work with them. That is my conviction. In my practice, it is like that. That's why after failover and all other black boxes are dangerous. According to my opinion, God forbid, it will be switched on. And there, for the last 2 hours, actually something has worked, and after that, all 1C was shifted there. And after that, instead of DBA, 1C programmers will not sleep trying to connect all this data. It shouldn't happen. But everyone works in their own way. There is PGTune. Is it good? When it offers parameters on the whole, it is normal, but it doesn't offer parameters for 1C. It will offer you the parameters that can be used for your hardware. Once again, there is hardware, so it can tell you about your hardware, tell you about hardware, limiting background processes, and there is specificity of 1C. So PG2 doesn't know 1C, but it will never actually amend auto vacuum parameters that are needed for 1C, but it will tell you about your hardware. So it can put shared buffers and cache size effective, but temps would be so small for 1C you need to enlarge them. This is the initial stage of setting. PGTune is normal for that. So the question has 2 words. Send me a manual. It is not a question, actually. Well, I'm not greedy, but actually, that is for me to answer your questions. Not something that I prepared. Yes, I will send it to you, but, well, I want you to ask me some questions. Maxim asks a question. For the second time, he wants a manual, okay. Simon is asking a question. Do you include pages checksums? Well, separately, without emphasizing it, it is not actually related to 1C. That is a good thing for database, but once again, any setting has 2 sides of the coin. Checksum may fail to compare, and the server will fail. And it can fail even after that, because I mean that after that you can get wrong data.
Не то чтобы спорный вопрос, не могу я спорить.
So it's not like a controversial issue. I can't actually argue with Oleg Bortunov, who states that a person that hasn't included checksums is bad. Well, what does it mean that checksum is different? It's not comparable. This is the end-of-disk system. How will you monitor it? You can monitor the checksum, or you can monitor the instances, you can monitor smarts, but actually, well, I cannot actually make up another option when checksum is not actually equal. And it's good if your database stops. I mean that you should think about it carefully, but database developers said that you should enable it. Okay, now we'll answer the last question, and you can send me more questions, and we will have WhatsApp pause later. We actually have discussed the settings for 2 hours, and 1 hour more. What file system is better to be used for 1C Postgres database? We use XFS, X4. We wanted to use that FS. But it works really long. It compacts in a good way, but it works really long after that. But I don't really think that you should pay attention to that. You can use the file system you have. I'm not speaking about huge multi-terabyte bases where you use a specific approach that requires specific tests. I'm speaking about mass installations, and in the settings of PG TMP, you should specify where the file, the catalog of statistics is. Statistics catalog should be in the short-term memory. That is obligatory, but it is obligatory that the monitoring system should see the vacant place in this catalog. Recently the place actually was over. In our case, it took us 2 hours to understand what happened because we didn't touch it. We haven't touched it for 2 years. It worked, and after that it became slow. Why? Because PGConf.TMP ran out of space. What do you mean that you continuously check Postgres log? That's cool, but at first you should be faced with this situation to experience this burden. Why memory? Well, it happened in the cluster on the instant where there are 101C bases. At first, admin stated, okay, I can create a folder and send Postgres there, but we cannot reboot it because clients are still working. Having done everything on SSD on BMW and VME, actually, it was there, but it was even worse. Huge multi-threading bracket, everything actually fails, so nothing can tolerate it apart from short-term memory. PG start tab goes to short-term memory. So don't be afraid of losing it. There are 2 catalogs in data folder PG, the start, TMP and PG start. If Postgres is disabled appropriately, all the contents of PG.TMT will be copied in PG.start. You will reboot, and after that, when you start it, it will be copied backwards. And even if something happened and this catalog wasn't copied completely, or for example, it is empty or it is nonsense, you can enable analyze and it will be very fast. Analyze is fast. It's okay. So I will answer the last question and we will move on. Do you use Uke pages? Send me the manual. Oh, I just like this kind of questions. Do you use Uke pages? No? Well, no. Prime is in the settings by default. Why? Neither enabling or disabling in my tests showed anything. How do I conduct tests? I can tell you about it right now, about the way we conduct testing. Actually, in 1C, I saw no advantage of huge pages setting. I saw no advantage, although I read articles. I really like the charts. When actually it started to work 200 times faster, these charts are great, but in my experience, I didn't see it, so I do nothing about that, nothing at all. I don't know whether I'm right or not, but that is my experience. So WhatsApp pause is finally over, and we can move on. So we're going to Enterprise. We lag behind in terms of time. I will try to speak about it really fast. At first, I want to show you the results and tell you about the testing, and after that, I will show you the way it compacts in real life and the way it looks like. I know it's really scary, and in that case, we will use compactification, but that is a cool thing. Here it is. Here is the way it works. What is it? What did they compare? How did they compare that? And if you do not want to enroll a real stand with client infrastructure and your knowledge level is sufficient to make experiments on product, and you should be very careful when you do it, but sometimes you can do it actually. So what's that? Database is 2.5 terabyte. It is compacted 380 gigabytes for 100 users. That is accounting of an enterprise, 400 accounters. So these are not 400 users in the reference book of users. In this reference book, they have 2.5 thousand users. These are 400 active users that work in this base. How do we measure the performance of the system before and after? The blue column shows the performance of the system before it shifted to Enterprise Postgres with compaction. Without compaction, I want to say that without compaction, that is plus minus 2%. I don't want even to show it to you. It's normal, it works. I mean, it's no worse actually. And the number of operations in the technical log of 1C that last more than 1 second. That is the first chart. That is within a week. Within a week of operation, there were 35,269, and after that, it was 7,568. No string of code was changed, and 1C development was frozen for 1 week to understand the effect of enterprise. So if you don't know, Postgres Pro company gives enterprise for free for a month, and that is an option for you to understand whether you will need to buy it afterwards or not. And among these operations, more than 5 seconds, there used to be 1,789 operations, and after that, we have 354 operations. Operations more than 30 seconds, there used to be 243 of them, and after that, we see 139. Why? These long operations are about formation of very heavy reports. This is a good query, not just a document. And compaction, well, I will actually try to show it to you, has no impact, actually no impact on the speed of specific report preparation. So if 1C Postgres is not compacted or Enterprise Postgres is compacted, that is actually very similar. However, that is compaction that allows us to include huge multi-threading. That's not even multi-threading, that is multi-session 1C. I mean, why the fall of load on disk system is so huge, by 5 or 6 times. I will show it on the example of a very heavy report. So when Postgres is not compacted, it will take 125 seconds and it will eat it It will eat disk subsystem with this kind of speed, and if it is compacted, it's 125 seconds, but the speed is different, and it will be 20 times lower. I mean, the disk subsystem will be 20 times more free because of the use of compacted data. These are the results, and this is my approach to testing of performance. No tests that can answer you whether it is fast or not within 5 seconds exist. This is a test of one operation, and in this case you actually have no right to change the settings of hardware or database for this single operation. You can change the code. This is about 80% of all optimization. Almost no settings of database can influence solely on this operation and not influence on all other things. So you will either have good situation here but bad situation in other instances, or good situation everywhere or bad situation everywhere. So you can't actually have it that I changed half of the base and everything remains similar, but this report works in a better way. No, something else will change as well. So this is my approach. Probably someone will not like it. I hope you can see it now. Bless you. So what do I want to see now? Actually, I promised to show you the way it looks like. Could you enlarge it, please? Could you zoom it? Wait a moment, please. I'm not doing anything important right now. Indeed. Can you see it now? It's okay. Okay, look here. So we have it here. What PG admin will be launched? Number 3, number 4. We will work fast but get 10 errors in the beginning, or we will work really slow. Let's launch the third one. Enterprise is connected. Do you know what's going on? What kind of errors these are? The third PG admin doesn't work with Postgres above 9. I mean, what do I mean it doesn't work? I mean that it tries sending queries that it doesn't know. That's why it is so bad. So look here. Where do we have scary things? ERP-DMI EE is compacted enterprise. First of all, let's start from the following. How can we state that Postgres should prepare compacted table space? So, finally, 1C helped Postgres, rather than impeding it. I hope you can see it now. 1C were a long time ago, when it only started working with Postgres inside the platform, it included two stop words, 1C data and 1C index. These ones, V8 1C data and V8 1C index. And if you create table space in Postgres whose name is V8 1C data, then the platform will automatically take all the tables and place them in this table space. So the same thing is related to V81C index. If it finds this name in table space, all indices will be placed there, but if it didn't find this name, they will be located in default. So we make two compacted table spaces, v81c index and v81c data, mkdir, we create folders and we give Postgres the right. Remember to do that, and after that we fulfill two commands on Postgres: create table space and with compression is true. So the parameter of compression works only in Enterprise Edition Postgres Pro, and in other Postgres this parameter does not exist. It creates compressed table space, and after that all the data downloaded there are compacted. Now look here. What is a compacted form? What do you expect from data compaction? You expect that the volume will shrink. Well, probably it cannot be zoomed, but I will comment on the things I do. Demo ERP base, demo ERP, demo of 1C website in compressed form. According to Postgres, it took 63 gigabytes. Oh, I think that you cannot see anything at all. Okay. Let's open PGAdmin 4 because it's possible to zoom the font. Everyone has appreciated the speed of the fourth PGAdmin operation in combination with 1C, especially when you try to deploy 12,000 tables. It will die for 10 minutes, but after that probably it will be revived, but everything will be very slow. Here it is. So let's try this one. Please do not deploy it. Now we'll try to zoom it. Can you see it in a better way now? Or probably you don't see anything. Okay, here it is. Demo ERP that actually takes 2 gigabytes. In compacted form takes 63 of them.
But this is nothing. The ERPEE database is real. It is coded. You can't see the name, but it is the client's database. It suddenly takes up 69 gigabytes, although it is much smaller. We will now try to understand this. Scary numbers like this. ERP demo shows this 69 gigabytes. I almost fainted when I saw it. It was such a compression. But in reality, Postgres, as it compresses, for every object, it creates a file of reflections of ERP objects. 60,000 objects of 1S. These are 1C objects. 60,000. Please have a look. If we log in 1C, in addition to the table itself, which is empty, it weighs nothing. 26 kilobytes. For each item, a separate file is created. This is the file of reflections. It creates immediately for the size of 1 megabyte. Therefore, as we unfold an empty ERP configuration will create 60 gigabytes of reflection files. 60 gigabytes of files. What those files will be? We have compressed data. When we compressed it, we deleted originally data, but Postgres knows nothing about it. In the data distribution map, those data are on that given page, but we deleted it. We compressed the data and put it on a different page. This file contains true references to the data. It contains a reference of what Postgres thinks and where it really is in a compressed file with a reflection file. Why is it the size of 1 megabyte? Because one reference... Did I say megabyte? No, it is 1 byte. A Postgres file is a gigabyte. So, as compressed, it will described in 1 byte. If we enter it, we will see this. In reality, there is very few information, and then there is a record, a short record, and then 3 million nulls. It's a short record, followed by so many nulls, so many zeros. So this does not take up space on the disk. So the database is, or it takes 19 gigabytes. So reference to nulls doesn't take any time. Let's calculate the indexes. Another 7. So all databases on this cluster equals 26 gigabytes. In pgadmin, you will see 63 and another 89. Remember this? That these are all lies. These are all lies. The system asks for dimensions, but compression is from time to 8 times. The more data are in the database, the more efficient is compression. If there are no data, there is no compression. So the actual database is compressed really well. So this database weighing 89 gigabytes, in reality 423 gigabytes. So do not be frightened. It was scary at some point of time. This is a PG database size, and these are all lies. This is not true. It shows the volume of unpacked data. It shows the volume of the catalog. It doesn't show the disk usage, but the sum of the sizes of files. It reads the attributes of files and sums up the attributes of files. PGDTB patch. Is Kostya here in this room? He could tell us more about the patch. Well, I was really scared 4 months ago. I panicked, and people tried to comfort me. I thought it was really bad. Compression is good. Compression is about 8 times. Of course, if you have pictures there in the nomenclature, so they will not be compressed. It is compressed with zip. In addition to the compression function, you can use it as encryption function, data encryption function. You can set the compression level at 0 and activate encryption, and then your data catalog will not be readable. You will have to know the key. So by default, the compression level is 2. 8 times is really good. Productivity at recording does not fall down, maybe by a couple of percent. Why? Because the processors take care of compression and they are really fast. So the productivity remains high. The performance remains high. So ERP takes time to take off. By the way, why does it take so long to launch ERP? Do you know? So what happens when I launch the database? What happens? This is the engineer of Postgres Pro talking. What did you say? Configuration? The configuration table takes 2 gigabytes in ERP. It can be read really fast. There is no load coming from it. So it is read and given. What happens then? The 1C server partitions it and put it into the cache memory. Therefore, the launch speed of 1C does not depend on the database in this ERP host. Let us see the console, the dashboard of 1C server. 1 second. We will remove things that are unnecessary and keep all the needed things. See, this is the operation of the database management system. It doesn't really happen at the start, but 1C server does something for 20 seconds. We don't even see the application. I don't know why they do it this way. But never blame the database for slowly launching 1C. What happens if we enter the RP hosts? We'll see that it has accumulated 3 gigabytes, and little by little it is preparing the appropriate context. The launch may take up to 2 minutes. This is the industry standard for ERP. This is for the new RP host. So the second start will be immediate. It will take between 15 to 20 seconds. So it has launched background data, news. We cannot live without news. So this is the compressed database. How are we going to measure? Would you like me to launch the configurator, or do you believe me by my word that the time will be the same? You will believe my words. All right. So let us prepare a bit. We will monitor things that are happening when we ask 1C to prepare a report. So what happens to the disk system in this case? So the profit report statement.
Смотрим скорость чтения 20 мегабайт.
So the reading speed 40 megabytes per second.
Вот тут не хватает экрана, там написано insert.
This would say insert into TT,
Insert, поэтому я говорю, сейчас.
insert into temporary table.
Когда с такой скоростью выбираете,
Sampling. Do you know how many records there are going to be? Millions and millions of records. So it will take up to 2 minutes. And in the meantime, I'll be telling you something interesting.
фирма 1С решила использовать сжатие официально. Фирма 1С официально поддерживает
1C officially supports Progress Pro Enterprise Edition.
нет нигде официального запрета.
There is no official ban on what is being done. I think I got your question. I have the corporate support. I don't remember any restrictions like this. Database management systems have a lot of tools, and 1C cannot describe all that is allowed. What is banned is directly prohibited. You cannot add indexes, for instance, directly. There is no direct ban on compression in Postgres or SQL. Well, we're going to have the partner workshop in the end of the month, so I will find out. A lot of databases operate on compressed 1C database. But I will ask. I will try to clarify this. So the report is not yet ready. We will have the second retrieving of data. And this is what I wanted to tell you. Those CFS files, the reflection files, there are a lot of them, and they require care. We get a special auto vacuum for reflection files, CFS parameter, compatible file system. Everything as in auto vacuum, how many workers, how often to launch, how long the pause should take. Why? Because when we changed the record in the database, we did update or delete. The reference has changed, the link has changed. So when delete happened, we do not need the link any longer. So those files are kind of empty with empty references. And there is a separate process, CFS process, which is responsible for that. It needs to be turned on, or, as in auto vacuum, it can be turned on but turned off, but then turned on for the night, every night. Even if you turn it off as a background process, if the reflection file reached the size of 2 megabytes, it should be compacted. So this process will be forced upon the system. So ideally, all those files should be 1 megabyte in size. Let's have a look. I guess something has happened. You see the statistics collector in operation. So there we are. Here is the report. As I'm talking, we will launch. Let me close this. We will launch an uncompressed database on the same hardware. Again, the same database. We'll wait for another 2 minutes to launch the same database on the same server. but on a different service of Postgres. This is just one C Pro Postgres of the previous build. No compression. Reporting time will be the same, 125 seconds. But we will see a totally different reading from the disk. So as soon as I got this Postgres Enterprise, a week after, we found an interesting thing. 60,000 files just broke the files of 1C. So 40% of the capacity of the disk space and 4 cores were immediately occupied, and this never ended. This amount of files drove Nmap in Linux crazy. It failed to respond properly. Everything was bad. So the patch is available. The February release of the Enterprise will not have this issue any longer. So the release will be in February. So everything has been corrected. So those files and their sizes are queried in a different way. Queried in a different way. So you will have another auto vacuum, or launch it for the night to compact the reflection files, to compress the reflection files. And don't be scared by the sizes. They're different in reality. Has it launched in the Internet Explorer? Do you know how to launch pgadmin on the browser, which is not by default? Does anyone know? Don't you know that this is an issue? Let me show you the following. If you press new pgadmin for Windows, it will launch on the browser by default. It is Internet Explorer on the service. If you copy it into RL, this is not just the address and the port. It contains a token, and only this way you can launch it on the browser or change the browser by default. A lot of copies got broken because of this, and no guidelines, no manuals describe this. I guess everyone launches it on Firefox and not anywhere else. So it has opened. So the same thing on the same server. Let's get it going. This is the same DT, the database copy. We will launch it and see the compression effect on this database. Let us speed up a little bit. 46, 100. We could see those numbers. It should go up to 500 megabytes per second to read from the disk in order to form the report.
Маленечко подождите.
We need to wait a little bit. So, while it is preparing the report, will you tell me when it is 500, okay? So, what do we need to remember about? When you recovered it from beta dump, or when you downloaded DT, remember to fulfill analyze. That is obligatory. I think that in this case they forgot about analyze on the base. That's why it is so long. Because without it, it will be really slow. That is one thing. Secondly, let's check what's going on. So it has been operating for 70 seconds. Well, if we don't see it, I will launch it for the second time. Probably we missed it somewhere. Look here. So once again, What is the special feature of 1C when working with Postgres? All indices of 1C are B3. This is the type of indices. In 1C there are no other indices. So where are these 500 megabytes? And at the same time, Postgres cannot cope with these indices with the vacuum. Indices grow a lot. Although vacuum was used here and auto vacuum was used here and they were cleared, still it is very difficult to put the leaves on these branches, and normally all of them are inserted in the down space. Reindex doesn't cope with it either. Reindex prepares vacuum on the indices. It doesn't cope with it. And if we So it doesn't know the statistics actually, but I can tell you about that. We will calculate statistic and launch it once again. So, no, it is very slow. Oh, look here. So we forgot about analyze on the base. Look here. Oh, you cannot see it. I think that no, you can't see it. We can see that this is 3-figure number. These are the characters after the comma. This is the time of DBMS call 162 seconds, and our query on the compressed Postgres took 125 seconds. This is the first query. It takes 170 seconds. We actually have 15 minutes late. I think that I won't have time to tell you about replicas, just a little bit probably. So this is an example of the base where DBMS doesn't know statistics. Probably it will take 10 minutes. We can wait for that, but while it is being prepared, I can tell you about a different thing. Indices. Vacuum cannot cope with B3 indices. Reindex command doesn't cope with B3 indices. It remains the same, so your indices grow a lot. And the speed of sampling for these indices falls by thousands of times. What can we do about it? In the 12th Postgres, index command can cope with it because actually it fulfills 3 commands: create, index concurrently. That is similar to yours. After that it says drop that one and rename the one that was just created with the name that of the index that was dropped. And while you are not using Postgres 12, you should do it yourself. What will help you? PG compatible. That is a script on Python, on Perl. It can do everything instead of you. Or you can use super extension for Postgres or PGConf. Why is PGConf difficult? To install it, you should use several operations. You should enable them on every base. It will create a new schema of PGConf. So you will set it, it will monitor it. And what is the reason of it? When we removed the data, even when vacuum was used there, actually there are empty spaces. And it happens that you took the table and there was a crash. For example, you stored the enclosures of mails, but after that you decided to eliminate them and you did not plan to store them, but the size of the base actually will show you that it is really huge, like that. That is what it will show, because actually there are a lot of empty pages. You need to do vacuum full. Vacuum full is a blocking operation, but PGRepack or PGCompactable can do it in a bit different way. Once again, they create tables, they move everything, so what am I speaking about? On 1C there are a lot of indices. Actually, frequently we have more indices than data, so we should monitor the indices. So I don't know, something happened with the internet. I cannot connect the cloud servers. Remember to monitor the indices. So very briefly, well, please believe me, it will be 500 here. I cannot connect it yet. So I would like to briefly speak about backup. and that will be everything. So, we are late. Okay, backup. And I will answer WhatsApp questions after the presentation behind the scenes. So I think you can say it yes. Well, actually, backups should be created, that's for sure, but how do we create them? PG dump or PG base backup? I didn't specify PG Pro backup because this is actually a setting above PG base backup. Yes, that is a very good setting, and tomorrow there will be a specific presentation devoted to it. So I will praise the manufacturers of this setting. PG dump. This is a logic copy. PG base backup is a file copy, so it's for you to decide. There is no consistency in PG base backup. PG dump guarantees. Now, if you copy walls, you will achieve consistency, and if you not copy them, that is just a copy of a folder. And if in this table, if you recorded something in this table and it was copied, but it was not recorded into that table and it wasn't copied, in that case there is no consistency, but you will not have it in PG dump. Secondly, PG dump can work with one base only. Yes, there is PG dump all that will back up also, but actually PG dump was developed for one base, and that is good within one C. All of us are experienced as SQL experts, and we are used to the fact that DBMS works within database, not within database server. PG base backup is for the whole server only. PG dump. Walls are not required. I mean, for the recovery. They are not needed. Base backup. Well, you cannot do without walls. Probably you will be launched at some point, but it will be bad. You need to have walls. PG dump. Complete compatibility. It does not depend on the version of DBMS or operating system, so if it was made on Linux, it can be recovered on Windows and vice versa. And boy, is it good. All of us have worked on MS, and we're used to the fact that all backup systems are on Windows, and that is great. We can connect Linux and download it on Windows, and it will work. And base backup depends a lot on the version of Postgres and the version of DBMS. PG base backup of Postgres 11 will never work on Postgres 9. It's not possible. Reverse compatibility does not exist, and direct compatibility does not exist either. So this is version to version. So disadvantage of PG dump. This is the curse of 1 gigabyte in one box. So I mean that it will not even say that something is bad. It will do everything, and after that PG restore it will say that something failed. And if you store more than 1 gigabyte in one box, PG dump cannot work with it, and base backup does not actually care. Even if you put several terabytes in one box, it will work. There is a specific utility, PG dump byte, I don't really remember, and PG restore. Box, what do you mean by box? One box of a table. Not the string. Box. Column, you mean? Column, okay. Yeah, box. Well, just imagine Excel file, and there is a box, 1 gigabyte in one box. When does it happen? Dynamic update of configuration. More than 1 gigabyte in one box is put in most cases. So, say goodbye to dump. It cannot be recovered. And the last aspect, if PG dump failed and was recovered after that, the base is healthy. If PG base backup was copied, it doesn't mean anything at all. Well, it was copied, that's it. The network was operating and the disks were operating, that's it. And unless we had this curse on 1 gigabyte, on the whole PG dump creates a log of errors, and if this log of errors is empty, then the base is okay. This PG dump will be recovered for sure. unless it was interrupted unexpectedly. And actually, all admins should not only drop backups, they should also recover them from time to time. So let's move on. I think that I will be able to tell you about that within 5 minutes. So it was very easy to recover that in 1C. Many people want to have a specific second, the data for a specific second that actually was 1 month ago. It's possible to do that with base backup and walls. And why did I draw two different diagrams here? Base backup will weigh this, and walls per day will weigh several times more than the base weighs. Thousands, hundreds of times. You cannot predict it. Just like transaction log in MS SQL. So, there is a cool thing, PG Pro Backup. And it learned to make increments. But even this thing does not cancel your duty to store all the walls. You store the walls for the period of time when you allegedly, I will explain you why allegedly you want to recover them. So this is my slide. Do you really want to recover it by that moment? Who has ever scrolled a database for more than 1 hour? How much did you scroll it? How many hours? The day before yesterday. Okay, the day before yesterday. And what did you do with the data that were included within the last 24 hours? But they actually needed to see this information and compare it, to compare two bases. Okay, so why did I show you this slide? Actually, when you scroll product base for 1 second, that is quite similar to a situation when you delete product base. The losses of this time, of this data, cannot be recovered. So you can create backup, and after that you will compare, and when these data are there, well, you cannot predict this time at all. Secondly, if you scroll the base for more than 1 hour, product base more than 1 hour, you cannot predict the speed of recovery. Why? It is great if you use PG Pro Backup and your increment is once per 15 minutes. The maximum time is 15 minutes. I mean that you should include 15 minutes of user's operation into the base. Why do we have a problem here? Your product server works, for example, with 100 threads, 100 users change the base at the same time, and it works. But replica plays them within 1 thread, and you cannot change that. It will always play within 1 thread. So these 15 minutes of time that you need to catch up can become 5 hours or 3 days easily. Show me a business that will tolerate the absence of product base for 3 hours for it to be scrolled 5 minutes backwards. What can we do about it? I can offer you one parent, 2 replicas, one online replica that is a synchronous one, and the second replica is 1 hour behind. So one online replica is for fault tolerance, that is not about backup, and you have a replica that is 1 hour behind and a replica that is 2 hours behind. And this is the maximum time that you can let your business go backwards. You can talk to business about this task, whether it is reasonable or not. Think about this task. So, I mean that in the reality we do not have these tasks, just have the replica that is 1 hour behind. In that case, your walls actually will be very few, and you will scroll back very fast. The same story is related to PG Pro Backup. If you agreed with the business that you need to store 2 hours of walls, it will be much easier. So we're a bit late. I would like to thank everyone. If you have any questions, you can come up to me and ask them. I will be there. Thank you.